Now, depending on the person's vasculature, depending on how well their body cleans up itself, because those circle marks, which we call bruises, if we want to be real nerdy, it's technically not a bruise, it's ecchymosis, not a hematoma, still broken capillaries.
All right, y'all, I'm here with Dr. Tom, ready to jump in. Thanks so much for joining us today.
I'm excited. Your online persona is so warm and inviting that I was looking forward to this.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I'm
Yeah.
excited to chat. So we have talked about some, Eastern practices, but
Hmm.
cupping specifically is not one we've talked about.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to bring this conversation. And so I want to start with that part of your life, like how specifically, like how did you get into this type of therapy practice?
Yeah. So I mean, it comes from like a bigger question that I've been asking myself. I've been practicing for over 23 years, and really, I was starting to reflect and go, wow, I could work 24/7, have a completely full, schedule, even with infinite rooms. I won't even scratch the surface of the population here in Baltimore, right?
Mhm.
And I really want to make an impact on people's healths, right? So that at an individual level, you just can't keep grinding and get to that.
Right.
So it became very interesting to me that like cupping, even though it's part and parcel of Chinese medicine, it's not originally from Asia. Um, but it's been part of it so long, and it was a folk medicine. It's been a folk
Mm.
medicine in almost every culture. So, well, here's something that we have modern day research on. We have, uh, you know, 4 or 5 thousand years of clinical use. And then we have an attachment to like all of these different cultures. And when I was teaching at a school in Manhattan, anytime we talked about it, we had a huge foreign student population. It was grandma used to do that, right? And I remember my grandmother talking about it, my great grandmother talking about it, but they weren't practicing it, right?
Right.
But it was always in households, and
Mhm.
even clinically, when it came into the Chinese practice, that was about 300 to 350 AD. There was a famous physician that basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, guys, get off your high horse. I know this is folk medicine, but it's really valid,
Mhm.
right? So for me, I was looking at the hallmarks of what makes a good home therapy,
Mm.
and one is it widely known? And yes, it is, even though it's kind of like a reintroduction, especially in the last maybe decade or so. Two, is it effective? Yes, we've got some modern day systematic reviews that are very positive for pain relief. And then three, is it safe? And classically, it was fire cupping, where you would use fire to create a vacuum and then apply a jar, a cup, a buffalo horn, a piece of bamboo. But nowadays we can use silicone. There's cups with pumps. So we've removed the
Mhm.
fire, we've removed the glass cups that we use in our clinic, and we've made it infinitely safer. So it hit all of those hallmarks of what makes a good home therapy.
Mhm.
And it just made sense that if I wanted to impact people at that home level, that this was a nice introduction.
Mhm.
The book I wrote on it, it's 131 pages long. I kept having the publisher going, well, it's not a long book. And my male ego is like, what do you mean it's not long? Yeah, and I was getting all offended. Like, what? I said everything I needed to say. It's a fine length, but really, I wanted it to be a conversation that you would have. I wanted you to be able
Right.
to pick up the book and read it and go, all right, I got it. I didn't want to under explain anything. I didn't want to over talk people. I didn't want to make it too medical.
Right.
I wanted to say, if grandma told you how to do this, what would she have said?
Right. Right.
Right. And there's so many new tools. And had I written this book 10 or 15 years ago, it probably would have been even shorter, because so many new cupping supplies have come onto the market, and there's so many fun little devices, and there's a wide price point, so like you don't have to spend a lot to learn how to do this.
Mhm.
And then you have tools that last a lifetime, and it just seemed so natural, and it had my head thinking about what am I going to write about in the future. And the process has become to become an author now is pretty straightforward, and almost anyone can self-publish for a little bit of money. You can
Right.
get some help along the way and pay what you need. So in my head, I might kick out 3 or 4 more books just in this still avenue of how do we empower people to take control of their health at home. And
Right.
certainly people that are talking about nutrition. There's people that are talking about like all these home remedies, but it's
Hmm.
still not at this critical mass where I think it's tipped the scales for us in our favor, right? There's plenty of people doing it. There's not enough.
Right.
So hopefully I'm just another voice adding into that entire symphony that'll eventually be playing, and
Yeah.
people will hear it and they'll start taking command of their own health.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that I want to get to that, the at home part, because I
Yeah.
mean, that's the best, it's like the most scalable way to do it. Like you said, your goal to scale it, like that's the most scalable way. So, okay, before we get too deep in the conversation, can
Yeah.
you, for those who don't know, can you explain what cupping is since we've been talking about it
Yeah,
already?
yeah. I always put the cart in front of the horse there. But cupping is a way of relieving pain and getting more circulation to tissue by using a cup, and sometimes drinking cups are used. But anything that's shaped like that you can create a vacuum in and applying that to the surface of the skin. Now, the procedure itself sucks the skin up into the cup and creates some space between the skin and the fascia and the muscle, and fresh blood infuses that area. Because of this closed system, that your body is relatively a closed system.
Mhm.
And that fresh blood, not only does it move out older blood that's slightly stagnant, that might have less oxygen, less nutrients, but might have some metabolic waste and some inflammatory markers in it. But behind that, this fresh, vibrant blood with nutrients and oxygen and antibodies and everything your body needs to repair itself behind it. So
Mhm.
you're triggering your body to do a response that it does on its own, but you're
Right.
you're aiding it and increasing that.
Right, right, right. So what would be some of the we'll start with like the physical pieces. I know I
Yeah.
used to do cupping all the time. And it's so funny because when this popped into my inbox about having you on the show, I was like, I feel like this is a sign from the universe. Like I need to get back into my regular cupping routine because I used to
Yeah.
do it all the time. And then we got one for home for home and just got out of
Mhm.
routine. But anyway, what would be some of the physical benefits people might see?
So number one, and this one's the most heavily researched: neck and shoulder pain and low back pain. Cupping
Hmm.
lends itself to larger, broader muscles. So those bigger muscle groups that are doing the bulk of your work, the ones that tighten up when you're stressed out, the ones that you're probably going to injure at the gym are
Hmm.
most likely, the traps, the shoulders, the neck, the lumbar spine, those muscles that are associated with that, the hips. So, cupping is also a little bit more horseshoes and hand grenades than some other techniques. So, does it hurt there? Is it sore? Is it tight? Yes, you can put a cup there. Generally.
Mhm, mhm. That makes sense, that makes sense. Beyond the physical parts,
Yeah.
because I mean, this is one of my favorite things to talk about because I like to go down the rabbit holes. I like to get
Mhm.
into things even remotely woo, which I don't really consider
Okay.
this woo, but some people might. But what would be like, have you witnessed people having like energetic, emotional
Yeah.
transformations from this?
Yeah, I think this speaks to a bigger topic, just of East Asian medicine as a whole, right?
Sure.
Um, there was this concept that Descartes kind of started with, this ghost in the machine, right? And that was coined later by another philosopher, I think in the 40s. I think he was British. That
Mhm,
term, ghost in the machine, but this, I think, therefore I am. And it wasn't that there was this spirit in a body in most Asian philosophy. It's a density of energy, right? So we have this concept that chi, which I think definitely, unfortunately, got affected by Western woo-woo culture. The Chinese physicians do not talk like this,
Right,
but they understand the concept that yes, everything has energy, right? I mean,
right,
that's more of a physics thing
right.
than even when we talk about chi, when we say it's stuck or there isn't enough. I believe it's more like physics. Where
Yeah.
is it kinetic, or is it kinetic, or kind of potential? right?
Right.
So if it's
Right.
potential, does your body have the ability to do it? And if it's
Exactly.
kinetic, is it doing the thing
Doing
it
it.
needs to?
Right. Hmm.
And when we're talking about the physical body, that's just more dense energy in Chinese medicine, right? At some point, it's been squeezed so much. And if we look at like nuclear physics, right? We know if we separate an atom, that's where we get like a bomb. That's where we get, nuclear reactors. There's so much energy in those atoms, right? So it does have a more modern physics type correlation. So when we're treating the physical body, yes, we're treating the energetic bodies. I mean, you can't separate that, right? if
Right.
i if I'm just doing, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory term, if even if I'm just rubbing your back, right, there's a psycho-emotional component to that. I'm comforting you. We're
Hmm.
having an energetic exchange even though
Right.
we're physically touching.
Right.
So you can't tease those out. And one of the uses I really like, and I called it stress in the book, right? I referred to it as stress, but really resetting the sympathetic nervous system, getting that balance, the autonomic nervous system, I should say properly, getting you into that rest and digest parasympathetic nervous state. So we can put cups along your back. And yes, we're affecting the vagus nerve, right? Those are buzzwords now, right?
Hmm.
But within that, we're helping regulate that vagal nerve tone, getting you into a more relaxed state. So we might be putting the cups on, even starting for something like respiratory health or
Hmm.
digestion. And 5 or 10 minutes, go by, and you're like, wow, I think I went out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
you dropped. Why? It is relaxing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And I love your explanation of that. The Because, yeah, like I said, I don't really consider this woo, but I think
Yeah.
it's like the Western world just kind of turns it into. So I like your explanation. I like your explanation of kinetic versus potential. I love that.
Mhm.
When, so, okay, so we can do the cupping at home. And
Yeah.
are there things like to look out for? Are there like, what are kind of your best practices
Yeah.
kind of thing we're doing it
Yeah.
on
So
this?
so the book itself covers like all the different types of cups because there's so many on the market now that you have to choose from. But the general guidelines, the general things we want to be cautious of, right? I've seen pregnant women do it. I believe Jessica Simpson got it done at a nail salon while she was
Mhm.
pregnant, and I'm like, oh, that's contraindicated. And it's not that it's dangerous. It's just we have no data on it, and
Sure.
certainly it's unethical to experiment on a pregnant woman.
Right.
Go figure. Science has more morals than politicians. But let's not go there. But within that, right, we're seeing things like blood disorders, right? So if somebody's a true hemophiliac, where cupping's probably not their modality, and I
Mhm.
would use caution in people that are on blood thinners. It doesn't mean
Yeah.
no, but maybe defer to your primary care before you start trying that.
Yeah.
Open wounds, we don't want to cup over open wounds. And then, deep vein thrombosis. So people have these large, they look like superficial pipes on their legs normally. We wouldn't cup over that.
Okay.
Other than that, it can be toned down to be pretty mild. So you can always
Mhm.
try it out. And if you don't like it, okay, great. That's not a reason to use it then. If
Yeah.
you're adverse to the sensation, then it's just not for you.
Yeah.
But other than that, it all came from folk medicine, so it was used for a lot of things. Now we know what it's good at, and that's still quite a few conditions, and it's really accessible for people. I wouldn't say to do it on infants, even though I always reference Godfather 2, when Fredo's a baby and he, Nona comes over with like the old school like little wine glass and puts it on his chest. Um, I wouldn't do it on infants because they can't give you feedback. But
That's true.
if you have a child that is verbal, like they're
Right.
2, 3, oh,
Yeah.
is that too much? No, it feels good or it doesn't. You
Yeah.
could probably do it on them too, and there's no age limit here, on the
Yeah.
upper end.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. So what would be some of the long-term benefits? Like, okay, well, actually, let me ask you this first. If you're going to start
Sure.
like a cupping practice, is this
Yeah.
something like what's the frequency that's recommended here?
So this is really where we have some variability too, based on the person that's getting it done.
Hmm.
If you're using it for something just for stress or to get over a cold, it might be a short like duration. I
Right.
just need to get through this period.
Hmm.
Normally, we don't want to cup the same area if there's still marks there.
Mm.
So you let those clear up. Now, depending on the person's vasculature, depending on how well their body cleans up itself, because those circle marks, which we call bruises, if we want to be real nerdy, it's technically not a bruise, it's ecchymosis, not a hematoma, still broken capillaries.
Yes.
But within that, it's a fancy way to say a hickey.
Yeah.
But within that,
Let's just call it what it is.
really, it's exactly the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
method of action, right? You've
Totally.
created a negative pressure. It
Suction.
sucked.
Yeah.
It sucked the capillaries till they
Yeah.
broke.
Yeah.
So certain people are going to bruise easier than others.
Right.
Depending on how much circulation you have, the darkness might be there, it might not. That's okay. As long as you're separating the tissue, you're giving an increased circulation, you're getting a good response. But a week to 2 weeks is what I've seen with some of these bruises, depending on how severe they are. And on some people, it might be a day or two.
Gotcha.
It comes down to a bunch of factors, but you're going to give that time for that body to heal before you would cup right there again. You can do things near that and work your way out or into a smaller area, depending on how you lay out the cups the first time. For people with chronic conditions, it might be once a week, might be once every week and a half when those bruises close up. For people that are just getting over a cold, you might do it once during that cold session, and then lean on other things, soups, hot blankets, those kind of things.
Right.
But it's different depending on what you're trying to treat. And it should be relatively intuitive. That's another reason why the book is so short. Where do you feel like it should go? Okay, that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So is it true, I've heard this before, and I want to know if this is true. Is it true that the longer your bruises or hickeys, whichever word we want to use, takes to heal, that's like you have more like congestion in that area? Is that true?
So that is a favorite Pinterest chart that floats around on the internet. And it's literally the rhetoric they teach us at school, right? There's a lot of reasons why those marks might be darker. Michael Phelps, I'll thank him, because the day after he swam that first time in 2016, the local news was in my office.
That's awesome.
Filming a piece on cupping. And they're like, why was his bruises so dark? And I'm like, he jumped out of the water, blood is still pumping, and his athletic trainer threw cups right on him. So of course it filled up with blood. So yes, that is one explanation. It is a valid explanation that there's more stagnation or blood stasis, and these are not, no, the blood always moves. This is a Chinese concept that means something different than the words that we're saying. It's just that we don't have an allegory in the West here. Yes, the blood is always moving. Some areas that don't get the best circulation, especially the microcirculatory system, which is going to be those capillaries and microcapillaries. So it can mean that if somebody isn't getting a lot of good circulation. On the other hand, if somebody is a cardiovascular expert, right? They're running all the time, they're moving their bodies a lot, they might have a lot of blood pumping through their body, and you put that cup on and you cause a really dark mark. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's stagnation.
Gotcha.
It is a possibility. When I was teaching, we always had these issues where whatever the class was before, people would come in and say, oh, I have this pattern. And it's like, no, you've got one symptom of that pattern, right? So we don't hang our full diagnoses in East Asian medicine on one symptom.
Right.
We still fall into that pattern because it's easy, but we shouldn't. So it could mean that. It doesn't necessarily mean that. In the book, I explain that too. And God forbid there's another acupuncturist or East Asian medicine practitioner, they'll probably send you some hate mail. You can forward it right to me. I'll fight with it.
Hey, I am all for different opinions on things, but what you're saying makes sense though. It's the case for anything, right? It's never just one thing.
Yeah.
So I totally see what you're saying. Okay. So going back to what I was going to ask you, what are some of the long-term benefits of doing this regularly?
So what you should see now I said that whole piece, and I'm going to say what you'll see is when you keep cupping that area, it may not come up as dark, right? So lasting pain relief, lasting chest openness, right? So you don't have that
Mhm.
congestion anymore. Improved digestion is another reason we use them on the abdomen and on the low back over the backside of the intestines.
Mhm.
So hopefully you're going to see long-term improvement in whatever you're using it for.
Mm.
Even
That's
stress management, right?
yeah.
Oh, you might notice that the next time you do cupping, oh, cups went on and I fell asleep much quicker, right? And
Mm,
that keeps improving, right?
mhm.
And that plays with the autonomic nervous system too, where you have more circulation going through your body, and that triggers your body goes, oh, I must be relaxed. These blood vessels are open, and it triggers
Mhm.
all the other of that response: deeper, slower breathing, slower heart rate, more blood flow to the intestines, right? So you're playing with this toggle. I'm stressed, I'm not, but you get
Mhm.
all of that anytime you move your body into any of that rest and digest. And that's why breath work works,
Mhm. Mhm.
so it's all these amazing things that I'm just picking one response and playing with that, and I'm
Yeah.
triggering all the others.
Yeah. 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 No, I love that. I love this. This is such a good tool. I
Mhm.
feel like I feel like when it first was, like, really popular, it wasn't as accessible as it is now. Like we were just saying, when you can do it at home, and I just feel like over the years, it's just gotten more accessible where it can be this at-home thing
Yeah.
that you can
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be, like, overcomplicated, or you have to find somebody special, someplace, whatever, that does it.
Yeah, you wanna have some basic knowledge of this, but this isn't a technique that I would gatekeep,
Mm,
especially once we remove fire or glass,
right, right.
because you might break it. If
Mhm.
somebody says they do acupuncture at home, I'm gonna call them a fucking idiot and yeah, like, hope that they don't hurt themselves or somebody else.
Right.
With this, this came from folk medicine and it belongs to the people. So yeah, I remember some acupuncturists getting up in arms because they heard massage therapists were doing cupping and PTs,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
I'm like, no,
Right,
no, 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 this one isn't ours. We
right.
can't. Let's not have this fight. This we took this
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
We
yeah,
just
yeah.
did it earlier than them, but
Right,
yeah, a few thousand years before everyone else, but
right.
it's still, the foundation of this is lost to time. Our oldest textbook that we have reference to comes from Egypt, but if they were able to write a significant volume on cupping, chances are it was around a lot longer than that, you
Mm,
know?
that's crazy. This one has been what do you think this one has been a practice that's been around the longest, like, historically?
So chances are, let's physical touch, massage, body work, whatever you want to call it, was probably one of the first,
Okay.
right? Yeah, I mean that just makes sense, right? Before we were using tools, we were
Sure.
using our
Our
hands.
body, yeah. Mhm.
Things like moxibustion, which is a technique we do in acupuncture, we burn an herb on or near the skin, predates acupuncture because we needed to be able to work with metal or tools.
Mhm,
We had to have fire to do that.
mhm.
So we were doing some kind of heat therapy, even if it was just as simple as like that shoulder hurts, sit near the fire with your
Right,
shoulder facing that.
right.
But cupping, uh, other than having fire and having a vessel that you can create a vacuum with, you didn't need much more. So
Mhm.
it was probably one of the earliest. And this
Yeah.
is not me with an anthropology degree. This
Sure,
just kind
sure.
of, this just kind of makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it was probably one of the earlier techniques.
Mhm.
Now I will say in that text that the Egyptians wrote in 1515 BC, they also talked about nose reconstruction after injuries. So it wasn't a light
Interesting.
text, it was a medical surgical text as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And the depth of knowledge, I mean, if you look at that from the degloved nose and the reconstruction of the nose, yes, the tools that we're using today are much more refined, but the procedure itself looks like what we would do in a modern surgical ward, which is
Mhm.
like mind blowing, right? We go, oh my
Yeah,
God, they were primitive. And you're like, no, they weren't primitive. They
they
built the
weren't.
goddamn
Right,
pyramids.
right, exactly,
Like
exactly.
we're still like, how did they do that? It must be aliens. And it's like, no, they sat around and thought about things. So it's and that's another reason why I wrote this book. It's like let's honor this tradition that like
Right,
is not just snake oil,
right.
so if this technique is still exists and is still used and has modern research, what else is out there? And there's a
Mhm.
lot. There's
Yeah,
so much.
yeah. Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So we've mentioned your book a handful of times. I have one more question I ask
Yeah.
you. Can you let everybody know where they can find your book and how they can get started with their own cupping practice?
Cupping, yeah. So
Yeah.
thecuppingbook.com, I literally called it the cupping book, unlocking the
Perfect.
secrets of ancient healing. We'll take you to the landing page for that. My website, charmcityintegrative.com. If people want to book me for lectures or come out and have me teach a class, I'm more than happy to do that. But charmcityintegrative.com also talks about all the other services we have. It's about my clinic here in Baltimore. But the book is available on every online retailer. If you don't want to support Amazon, I totally get that. It's on like 12 other sites.
There you go.
So it should be pretty like available everywhere.
Yeah.
If you do decide to go with Amazon, if you throw that book in your basket, you'll see a bunch of suggestions for cups. You can go ahead and look around and see what fits your budget, and kind of like if you read the book first and go back in order, you'll learn the differences of all the different types. This is the other thing, right? The book isn't too expensive. The cups, $20 will get you a great set.
Hmm.
So, for about $50, you're all in, and you
That's
have
it.
a new
Yeah.
knowledge base and tools that'll last you a lifetime if you keep them
Yeah.
clean. And yeah,
Yeah, I love that. It's again so accessible. Who knew? Okay, I love
yeah,
this. Okay, I have one more question I want to ask you that I like to ask everybody. What do you think
sure.
is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
Whew. I'm going to give you my canned response. That's not exactly the same question. I think meditation.
Mm,
I'm saying that for so many reasons. I've been trying to meditate since 1994. I say it like that because it's a practice.
mm,
But I've been consistent for over 5.5 years now, without missing a day.
wow.
I'm still insane, but this makes me tolerable. It makes me manageable, and it allows me to come back down to a baseline where
Mhm.
I can go, no, I don't think this is in line with my purpose. Yeah, I'll still scream and yell and lose my shit, but that coming back down and going, oh, I didn't handle that well,
Yeah,
or how do I make myself align with what my goals are and what I
right.
think my purpose is. I'm almost 50 now. Hopefully one day I'll figure that out. But I do think meditation gives you the space for all that. Wayne Dwyer
Yeah.
used to talk about the space in
Mhm.
between,
I love
right? So
that.
that's I
Yes.
like that. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Love that. I agree. I think it's one of the most underestimated tools to change your life. So I'm on board with that. So I love that answer.
And even cheaper than cupping. You don't even need
Absolutely.
tools.
It's free.
you know.
Yep, 100%. Thank you so much for this conversation, Dr. Tom. I'm excited for everybody to dive into the book and get their own cupping set and start this. I mean, I think this is such a simple tool to put in your wellness little, regimen at home. So I love this. Thank you so much for
Mhm.
sharing your insight and your wisdom for all this.
Oh, this was so much fun. Thank you for having me on, Hope.